Welcome to the Conscious Conception Show with me, Sue Ritchie. This show will take you from confusion to clarity, confidence and emotional healing to a joyful pregnancy. This is the place where we uncover the real truth about fertility and why preparing for conception, mind, body and soul, is more important than ever. With honest, empowering conversations, we'll explore the hidden factors impacting fertility and how a holistic approach can help you take back control of your journey. Whether you're trying naturally, navigating IVF, or just starting out, know this: you're not alone, you're not broken, and you're already on your way. So let's walk this path together. Conception Show. I'm Sue Ritchie, holistic health and fertility specialist. And today's show, I know, is going to resonate with so many of you who are listening in today. It's certainly something that I've experienced in my life, and I know that it's also something that my guest today has experienced too. And it's something that so many people don't realize could be impacting their fertility. It's not, not what you're eating, not the supplements you're taking, not even your timing, but the pace you're living your life at. Because so many of the couples that I speak to, they're doing everything that they possibly can, researching, tracking, planning, while also, juggling really busy careers, responsibilities, and, being under constant pressure. And what often gets overlooked is that your body needs safety, space, and also calm to conceive. So I'm delighted to welcome Briony Lawton from Space Together, because she's going to be joining me today on the show. And she specializes in burnout, helping people to slow down and really reconnect with themselves. And we're going to explore what happens when the body is constantly in that doing mode, when you're constantly busy, and what it actually needs instead of all of that. And I'm sure she'll be sharing some really useful tips on how you can start to bring more calm into your life. So hi, Briony, welcome. It's so lovely to have you on the show today.
Oh, it's so wonderful to be here, Sue.
And I know we've had a lot of conversations, but I just wonder if you could start really by sharing, with everybody who's listening, as to, how you got into what you're doing now. Why did this happen? Why have you now looking to help people with this whole area of really sort of slowing down and bringing calm into their lives?
Oh, Sue, so my name's Briony from Space Together, and for so many years, probably more than I can remember, I spent my life in corporate HR. At one point, I was commuting 4 hours a day, not stopping, not slowing down, and my nervous system was constantly activated. And I left corporate life from a busy HR life, senior leadership role. Oh, it'd be 6 years ago now. And it was then that I came to see and realize that really I'd been operating in autopilot for so long and was actually burnt out. My body was giving me signs that I overrode, and I started to do a lot of my training that I'd never had time to do when I was in the busy corporate role. So my coach accreditation training, and I soon saw that through a lot of my training, through coach training, through somatic practices, listening practices, and I specialize in a particular coaching style of listening, that actually all of this training was in service of burnout recovery. So I realized that actually I started doing a lot of training in burnout, understanding the nervous system, reading heaps, training to really understand what was going on in our bodies when we don't slow down. But it's more than that, as you know. It's about safety. It's about the conditions in which we're living. So, this is a complex area. And 6 years on, Nellie. 6 years on now.
It certainly is, and I think it affects many, many, many people, and I think particularly women, but I think it also applies to men as well.
Yes.
So when you
Yeah.
sort of talk about burnout, Bryony, what does that actually look like in everyday life, especially for high achieving women?
So burnout, typically, this is not like a dramatic collapse. Often people think, oh, there's a moment in time when suddenly everything changes and you suddenly burnt out. But actually, it's much quieter, subtler than that. Certainly in my own experience and my training around burnout is, it's that constant waking up tired, but never really feeling restored. You're running on adrenaline, and your lists are running around your head. You find that actually your patience runs very thin, so your tolerance, so you might find yourself snapping. And I think that one of the biggest indicators is a kind of sense of flatness, actually, and
Mm.
disconnection. And what I mean by that is you're present, but not really there. So you feel like you're operating in a fog quite often. Now, there are many symptoms around burnout, and so that's just a short summary. And of course, that doesn't mean to say if you're experiencing some of these symptoms, it means to say you're burnt out either. But they are symptoms and signals that our body is trying to tell us something.
Yes,
And I,
it's a big area, isn't it? It's huge.
it is.
I, I suppose a lot of high achieving women are, so used to really sort of saying yes all of the time, pushing through, and I suppose ending up being the one that everybody relies on. Everybody
Mm.
depends on you. And so I sort of wonder why, how do you think boundaries or lack of them actually play into this whole thing around burnout? And I suppose, it comes to emotional exhaustion as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think the emotional exhaustion, I think from a boundary perspective, quite often boundaries get a kind of bad press, and it means like we're just saying no and we're building up our walls around us. But ultimately, it's about really connecting and identifying with the things that sustain you and the things that deplete you. And quite often, as high achieving women, we override all of that. We say yes to everything because actually the old patterns, our nervous system learns to keep safe and to survive, that we have to be on the go all the time. So we are operating from an old system. And quite often then that tends to turn into, I talk about self-sabotage a lot in terms of people pleasing. So we end up saying yes to absolutely, absolutely everything. And I remember a time, Sue, actually, I'll give you a little story. I suppose I was working in a city at that time, and I said yes to three things, to three engagements in an evening. And in my head, I actually thought it was achievable.
Yeah.
And I mentioned that I was commuting 4 hours a day, and I'd got something in London, I'd got something out where I live, and lo and behold, it just ended in a bit of a disaster, to be honest. Um, but it was ultimately the system's way of saying, actually, to keep safe, I have to say yes to everything. So, but ultimately, boundaries for me, when in particular my coaching, we get to have space to think about what are the non-negotiables here
Mm.
in order to, so I think of boundaries as non-negotiables. What are the things that I'm saying yes to and paying attention to those more than anything, to then determine actually, well, what's helpful here for me and what's not helpful, what restores me, what doesn't. And we know there's so many things that we talk about in terms of what are those things that generate our batteries and what are the things that deplete them, and quite often we're saying yes to all of it. So ultimately, when we are running so much on adrenaline and cortisol running through our body, the lack of boundaries, that I think really what happens is it amplifies the lack of boundaries, and we're just saying yes to everything. And that's our nervous system in the driving seat, effectively.
I know. I know exactly what you're saying, and I've been there and worn the t-shirt as well. And I certainly remember. I realised mine sort of ended up with having a big health wake-up course a few years ago now, and there were two key things that really I recognised that sort of kept me in this whole constant busyness mode, if you like. And certainly people pleasing, as you said, is the one, not saying no to anybody and just taking on more and more when I knew that I couldn't actually really cope with any more. And and it is a case of, learning those boundaries. And I think so much actually comes from, our childhood and what we've been conditioned in and what we've learned about this situation. And yeah, it's very difficult to learn to actually, you can, because I have learned that now, is to put those boundaries in place and say no. But it is something that I'm sure you'll agree, it's something we have to take a conscious effort, if you like, to recognize it and then start actually putting those boundaries in place. And to me, it's because, looking after our own health and well-being, it should be a priority.
Mm. Oh, you're absolutely right, Sue. I mean, I think ultimately, these our nervous system is designed to keep us safe. And when our, earlier years, our formative years, when we have learnt certain behaviours, I don't know whether it's keeping busy or being helpful, whatever it is, becomes a learned way of operating in our system. So it becomes a pattern ultimately, and that keeps repeating.
Yeah.
And obviously, and I think one of the things as busy, high-performing women is that actually we just keep going because we want to achieve more, because if actually, and that's the old operating system, wanting to keep us safe. And that's not wrong. So how we are operating is not wrong. It's just, it's how our body and our nervous system is designed to keep us safe. And ultimately, like you said, I think there's something about, for me, the first point is really just noticing it. Just noticing, not making anything wrong, just noticing that and going, there they are, there she is, the busy mode's here. Just noticing it,
It's that
yeah.
awareness, isn't it? Having that awareness of what's actually happening.
Yes,
So,
yes.
Brian, even when women, recognize that they're, in that exhausted mode, and slowing down can really feel, uncomfortable and maybe even feel unsafe. Why is that? Why does that happen? Why do women find themselves in this situation?
Well, I think, like we said, actually, think of it like your operating system. When we have learnt a way of being, so if the busy, like keeping busy, is something that feels safe. When we try to interrupt that, and with an overhaul, for example, go right, I'm switching everything off, our body suddenly thinks, actually, that's not safe. It feels deeply uncomfortable to stop, to slow down, because our pattern is that of being busy. And it feels safe to be busy. So when we slow down or we rest, or we find that there's a gap in the diary, we go, oh, suddenly go, I need to fill it. And that is the old operating system really driving, like I said, in the driving seat, because it feels so unsafe to do anything different. And that's the neuroscience bit, really, because that's the nervous system learns patterns. And that's what's driving in the driving seat, effectively. And that's why when I know certainly even now, look, old patterns keep repeating. Even now, I have a period of time, there's some space. I'll go, oh, that feels uncomfortable, because the norm is to fill it
Yeah, I
because it feels
recognise that as
safe.
well.
Good. Yeah.
I can still
Yeah.
get caught up in that pattern, but as you say, it's like, with more awareness, we can catch ourselves and not step into it. So for me, I certainly remember, when I had my big health wake up call, having that aha moment, realizing that actually it was all tied up with me um, finding my self-worth, if you like, in
Yeah.
being busy. That as long as
Yeah.
I was busy, then I was worth something. And and I don't wonder what you think about that as well. Is that something that you recognize?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, I think if you look, um, being controversial, kind of how society works, how corporate, how systems work, and what we are rewarded for in terms of, and sometimes rewards come in the form of keeping busy. So, and that's how structurally how things generally are work, basically. So I think in terms of our self-worth, again, coming back to the operating system, if you like, in terms of what our systems has learned to be rewarded. So quite often you say, oh, I deserve this rest. Oh, just take a break. I deserve this. But actually, rest and space is inherently something that is foundational that we all need in order to function and thrive and live and conceive well. So again, it goes back to those old patterns of what did we get rewarded for
Mm.
or around us, or even, and this is explicit as much as implicit. So all the signals that we pick up, I think, is something that are in the systems, both in our family systems, in working systems, all of it. We're picking up all these messages all along the way in terms of what is it to be around here to be safe, and self-worth, really is at the bedrock of that and impacts all of that. Does that make
Uh,
sense?
yeah, I think it makes makes an awful lot of sense. And I certainly recognize that pattern for myself as well. So for
Mm,
someone who feels, disconnected from themselves, always busy, always doing stuff, where do they actually begin to actually sort of rebuild that relationship, reconnect with themselves?
mm. Well, like I said, there's something about just noticing it, actually, and that disconnection. I just to speak to that for a moment before moving into the kind of what are the things that we can put in place to support ourselves. I remember very clearly years ago when I was watching television, but I really wasn't there. I was on the sofa and I couldn't have told you what was on there, simply
Mm.
because I'd been operating in this fog. And, you know, the first key thing for me is just noticing that, going, actually, gosh, I feel quite foggy, is noticing. And this is really, really gentle, Sue, because actually we'd all love a magic wand to just make it all go away.
That would be lovely and easy, wouldn't
Wouldn't
it?
it? Wouldn't it be lovely? Yes. But really, it starts with
Life,
no,
unfortunately, is not usually like that.
no, I know we'd all love a magic wand. But for me, it all starts being gentle. It starts with a whole heap of self-kindness for how you've got there. And start with noticing. Everything starts with noticing for me because there's a whole equation around noticing. Noticing precedes action. The more you notice, the more empowering it is. So it's just noticing rather than leaping to change immediately. And, for me, there's something about checking in with yourself. I do this a lot in my sessions that I run in workshops and online individually. It's like, well, how am I right now? On a scale of 1 to 10, if you like numbers, 0 being like flat as a pancake, 10 being kind of spring-like, and just noticing where you are. How do you feel? Use colours, whatever works for you. It doesn't have to be limited to numbers, but there's something about noticing. How are you feeling in your body? What do you notice in your body? And where there may be tension or what might have given you some energy today or what might have drained you, just to simply notice. It's not to fix it yet, just to start noticing and listening. And fundamentally, burnout really is about the loss of sense of self as in a mix and cocktail mix of what you call toxicity. Again, there's whole trainings, reading that, like I say, it's complex, but think of it like your Wi-Fi. Certainly we have Wi-Fi that sometimes cuts out, and it's like, so how do I reconnect myself? How do you reconnect your Wi-Fi? Well, actually, let's just check in with it. Let's see whether it's plugged in. What do you notice? So it's really starting looking at that, those connections to yourself. And this isn't to be forced. It's like I said, with kindness, and the small moments really matter. So I know we think that these small moments might be trivial, but if, like I was, and sometimes you can find yourself in back-to-back meetings with absolutely no breaks. So again, your adrenaline and your cortisol is running, is so activated and switch on where we're not meant to be. So it's like finding those moments to really switch off the nervous system, to allow yourself to deactivate from an activated state. And know that it's okay to come down from an alert mode. Because I know, again, if we had 2 hours or even the day, Sue, we could go on about it forever. But the point is, it's like, can we find these small moments where we get to, like our phones, just turn it off? So we're deactivating our nervous system when normally it's switched on all the time, which is where the problems really start, when we're switched on, and that's what impacts our system, our hormones, and really deprioritizes kind of reproduction in that way. So really it's about starting small, noticing, talking to yourself like you would a friend, and incorporating those small switch off moments in the day, just to check in with yourself and see where you're at, to notice.
I guess it would be a sort of a useful thing for actually almost like schedule in those little quiet time moments in your calendar. If you find it difficult to actually do it, maybe that's something that that would be helpful.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I know quite often I'll set an alarm, and I will stop for 1 or 2 minutes, and that's at regular points during the day. So you can set your alarms on your phone to just stop. So, or put it in your diary, because quite often we're not putting ourselves in the diary either, and that's a whole other thing that we could go into about how do we put ourselves in our own diary.
Yeah, blocking out some time for me time, if you like, in our diary. I find that very, very, very useful, I have to say. And it certainly helps. It helps me just keep everything on a more calm basis. And sometimes it takes a bit of a thing to actually, to do it, because somebody wants you to be in a meeting, or somebody wants to go, no, I don't. I'm not going
Absolutely.
to.
Absolutely.
So is there anything else that you would, sort of start, where people could start to really start honoring themselves more, I suppose, so that they don't feel like they've actually got to overhaul their whole life? Because I personally don't believe it's about that. It's not about perfection either, but it's just what are some other things that people could start doing?
I mean, you're absolutely right. We all think we've got to now go and change our lives, overhaul our life, but actually that's just another way of striving. So that perpetuates the cycle of doing all of the time. So this is about incorporating as opposed to overhauling. And this is about re-establishing a new baseline, because quite often when we're operating on a switched on mode all of the time, it's like re-baselining. And actually, like we said, it's incorporating those small moments to check in, to understand what's going on. And if you need to move physiologically, actually, when there's a lot of work around in our various nervous system states. If you're feeling agitated, move. If you're feeling like you want to run away, then soothe. And if you feel a bit stuck, again, this is about some of the soothing things that you can do, and the self-regulation practices that you can do to incorporate. And for me, ultimately, and I would say this is because it's strategically helping people to rest, is, rest is at the foundation of everything. And there's so much evidence to show that going to bed at the same time every night, to start signaling to your system that it's okay to switch off, are good habits that we can incorporate.
Okay, that's lovely. Unfortunately, sadly, we're really coming to the end of the show.
We could
So I
go on
just
for
like to
hours.
thank you very much for joining us today. And if people want to contact you, how can they do that?
Oh, you can find me on LinkedIn as Briony Lawton and on Instagram as Space Together, and you'll find me quite actively there talking about what I'm doing and some of the sessions that you're able to come and join me on or speak to me directly for one-to-one support and retreats.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you once again, Brian. It's been a really useful and interesting conversation. And I think what really sort of stood out for me is that, how often we just override the very body, if you like, and when we're talking about conception, the very body that we're asking to create life. And, how powerful it can really be when we, begin to listen, we support and reconnect with ourselves, not just for conception, but for the kind of parent and, the environment we want to bring our future child into. And, to me, that's a really important part of the whole concept of conception, if you like.
Yes.
So really, for anyone's listening, if you feel you like any support, then I'm here. And all you have to do is to just reach out. And thank you so much for joining us on the show today. And if this episode, you think anybody else needs to hear it, please do, recommend, let somebody else know about it so that they can actually come and listen to the recording and hear it. And if you're ready to take a more conscious and holistic approach to your fertility journey, then I'd love to walk that path with you. And, we're not just talking about conception, we're talking about creating healthy, happy couples who are supported, informed, and empowered to become healthy, happy parents. And to me, that's really the heart of it all, creating healthy, happy couples to make healthy, happy babies. So until the next show on Tuesday, the 16th, it would love you to join me as well for the next show. That would be great. Do take good care of yourselves and, carve out some quiet time for yourself. Put it in your diary now, in your calendar. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Conscious Conception Show with me, Sue Ritchie. To stay informed and inspired, be sure to tune in every third Tuesday of the month at 7:30 a.m. Pacific on Transformation Talk Radio. Subscribe so you never miss an episode and sign up for my newsletter for helpful tips on boosting fertility and preparing for positive, empowered parenthood. If you're ready for more support, connect with me on social media on Instagram and LinkedIn and at Optimum Fertility, or visit my website at sue-ritchie.com.